Cold Case, an Angelica Dale Mystery by P.K. Armstrong. Chapter 24. I made my way home, trying not to think about what I thought I had just discovered. I knew driving distracted was dangerous. I went into the house and called hello to the kitchen occupants in general and made my way to the office alcove. Moments later, Sandy tapped on the door. Angel, are you okay? You seem distracted, she asked hesitantly. I looked up at her and just shook my head. Okay, that's it. You need a glass of wine to relax you. Come with me, she said, completely in mom mode. We arrived at the kitchen, and I could only imagine the crazy look on my face because Chuck stopped to stare. Sandy reached for the red wine, and Chuck grabbed a glass. She sat me at the bar on a stool, and Chuck poured. He slid the glass toward me, and I took a sip and closed my eyes. Angel, sweetheart, are you okay? Chuck asked. I opened my eyes, looked at them, and slowly grinned widely at them. I think Moira Adams has Sasha's diary. Sandy and Chuck both stopped dead, and then Chuck reached up and got 2 more glasses and poured more wine. You have got to be kidding me, Sandy said incredulously. What makes you think that? Chuck asked, clearly trying to put together this important development. I explained my subterfuge and my interview with Moira Adams. Chuck thought a minute. You don't think she got her information from her mom or her grandparents? Maybe she just embellished on their memories of Sasha and created the fandom? It's possible, of course. I sipped more wine. But if you could have seen how animated she became talking about her aunt, I think you would agree she has another more detailed source. Sandy nodded. I agree. How would she know what her business plans were? And I don't think her mom or her grandparents would admit that Sasha took money from them. It would ruin her good daughter image they had built up in their minds. I nodded. Good point. Chuck moved to the refrigerator and began taking out ingredients. Sandy, how about you pull out some of that pizza dough and I'll make some pizzas? Sandy smiled lovingly at Chuck and went to the extra refrigerator in the garage and retrieved the dough. She put it on the counter and pulled out a huge salad bowl, and they began preparing dinner. I watched them for a second and then took my glass of wine and wandered through to the family room, opened the large patio doors, and stepped out into the cold. The moon was shining brightly in the clear sky like a magical orb, turning the snow-covered yard and trees into a cobalt. I sipped my wine, my body heat, in stark contrast to the cold temperature around me, felt stimulating. The snatches of evidence and interviews began that familiar twirl around my head on sticky notes that danced before my eyes. I put them in place one after another. There were holes in my imaginary whiteboard. I needed to get back with Terry Flack and see if we could finally prove that Derek had plans to burn the club and collect the insurance from the hidden policy. I watched snow begin to fall again and listened as Sandy and Chuck laughed. Ditches clinked and water splashed. I shivered at the cold. Or did my shiver come from thinking about what they would say if I told them about the last task on my list? I needed to get into Moira Adams' home and find that diary. Dinner was only Sandy, Chuck, Daniel, and myself, as Jacob had plans with a new love interest. The homemade pizza, Chuck's specialty, was delicious. I had stopped at 2 glasses of wine, my logical, investigative mind slightly blunted. Sandy and Chuck had clearly filled Daniel in on the developments in the case. We had just started on coffee and cheesecake when he looked at me sharply and asked, So can you get a subpoena for the diary? No, unfortunately, the police department and district attorney consider the case closed. Even if it was an active case, I wouldn't have enough evidence to prove the diary exists to secure a search warrant. I took a bite of cheesecake and thought a moment. If I was on the job, I would probably call her in for a voluntary interview and see if I could get her to hand it over. Can't you ask her to let you see it? Sandy asked. I shook my head. I could, but if what I suspect about her motive is true, she wouldn't be inclined to let me have the diary. I paused again. Everyone ate silently except Daniel, who, I discovered when I glanced up, was looking at me intently. I looked away. I had taken a shower and was curled up in the chair in my room when there was a knock on the door. I suspected it would be Daniel. I rose, crossed the room, and opened the door. Daniel entered the room and shut the door. I then realized he had something in his hand. So, he said slowly, I think you were quiet because you didn't want Mom and Dad to know what you were going to do. Do? I asked, my eyebrows raised, feigning innocence. You are going to get that diary, aren't you? Daniel asked pointedly. I had guessed that he knew what I was about to do when he looked at me over the dinner table in that piercing way the Roland men seemed to have perfected. I was hoping I was mistaken, but as soon as he appeared in my room, I knew I was caught. Even though I did not want any of Christopher's family to know what I planned to do, I didn't want to lie to Daniel. Breaking and entering is illegal. I tried sidestepping the inevitable. He sighed heavily. You shouldn't do it alone. I was surprised by his serious nature. I should come with you to be a lookout. I was shocked. This was something I would have expected to come out of Jacob's mouth, out of excitement for the adventure, of course. Daniel wasn't the type. His next words shocked me even further. At least call my brother to see if he can come help you. Why would I call Christopher? I touched his arm. Daniel, I don't call Christopher every time a case gets difficult. He's a sworn officer. He has his own cases. Besides, he knows I am perfectly capable of handling business. If I wasn't, I would need to hang it up. Is this why you came up here, to convince me not to go alone? His demeanor changed and he grinned sheepishly, holding out his hand to me so I could get a closer look at what he was holding. It was a white wand, about 14 by 8.5 by 2. What is it? I asked. He grinned again. A handheld document scanner. He paused and looked at his feet and then glanced up at me. I thought it would come in handy. I raised my eyebrows at him and he laughed. Well, you can't break into her house and then take the diary. She might notice it is missing. So you will have to go in, and instead of trying to take pictures of each page, you can just run the scanner down the pages and they will upload to the cloud. You have been watching too many spy movies, I said playfully. So you don't want it? He quipped. Cheeky, I laughed. No, I'll take it. I turned him around and shooed him out of my room.